Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link Trait and Ignite herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Ignite are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we wanted to talk a little about weed control in shelter belts.
Well, when we think about shelter belts, there are a lot of different things going on. There could be bushes, there could be trees. You may have grass seeded out there, or you may be trying to keep the soil completely black and devoid of all plant growth other than the trees. And I think that's a good idea when you have a real young shelter belt. It's keeping the grass out of there so there's no competition. Those trees can grow a little bit quicker. I think that's a good thing. Once your trees get established, then it's a nice thing to have grass out there. It's better for the soil. You have less erosion, all those things. The problem is once you have grass, now controlling the weeds, you can't do tillage anymore. So you have to use some sort of herbicide to keep the weeds under control.
Yeah, but maybe tillage isn't the way you should go in the first place, trying to keep those soils black. So I'll just tell you on our own farm some of the things that we've used in the past. We have used Casseron and Princep in shelter belts, but quite honestly, Roundup is the one product that should, hopefully, kill about everything there. And as long as you're keeping that Roundup off the leaves of the trees, you have very little risk that it's going to do any harm at all to the trees.
Well, even that, I would say this. Try and keep it off the bark too. You don't want to have any drift. You want to take any risk on it. Control the weeds that way. That's a nice thing to do. Now, let's just say that you've got grass established out in your shelter belt and you want to control weeds out of the grass, because that's the more common thing. I mean, that's going to apply to more people. The typical product that we'll recommend has been 2,4-D. Now, the risk with 2,4-D is drift, and especially this year. We were so warm through the winter, and on our own farm, we had the trees budding and leaves starting to come in mid-March. So there's going to be a lot of risk this early spring spraying 2,4-D. So if you do it, don't get carried away with the rate. Try and get out there early as those weeds are just starting to come so you can use the lower end of the labeled rate and still be effective on the weeds.
But if possible, if the leaves haven't gotten set on your trees yet, that would be a good time to hit it hard with a good strong rate of 2,4-D. And I'm not saying spray the trees, I'm saying spray the weeds in between the trees. You should have good success with a high rate of 2,4-D. You have very little risk to the trees if they don't have leaves on. Now, if they have leaves on already, I've had it where I personally have sprayed 2,4-D underneath trees, dropped the leaves off the trees, and the leaves didn't come back on for the rest of the year. And some people thought that I killed the trees, but of course they came back just fine the next year.
Oh boy, you know, I just don't want to take risk. And we get along those lines, we get questions.
You want to take risk?
Can I aerial apply something over the trees? You know, if you're doing some kind of foliar spray with an airplane over trees, you are taking risk. And yes, there are some trees that you certainly could get by with that on, but there are other species of trees that are susceptible to certain products. So I wouldn't recommend that. I'd recommend being really careful. Finding a day like today when there's not much wind, you can get out there and do it without that big worry of drift. That's what I would do.
Yeah, but you also have to worry a little about that vapor pressure. So that's something you need to keep in mind. Now, there is one other product that we didn't mention yet, and that is Treflan. If you're going to do tillage, you mentioned tillage right away when you were talking. We used to put on Treflan. Just check the label to make sure whatever yellow product you're using is labeled, because I get guys that ask about Sonalan and Prowl and Treflan. Just check the label to make sure it's labeled for the trees that you want to use it in.
One of the weeds that you may see out in your shelter belt and out in your fields could be our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?